Good?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
Oh. Welcome, y'all. It's great to be with you a week and a bit after Easter,
Yeah.
which is exciting. We had an amazing Easter weekend. Daryl preached
Yep.
powerful message. And now we're back in the book of Ephesians.
Yes.
Ephesians chapter 3. And Alita right here, you. Let's start over. That was terrible. I don't know. Okay, we'll keep going. You preached on Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 to 21, which is my favorite prayer in the New Testament. And
Okay.
so
Yeah,
why
awesome.
don't you walk us through it, give us a bit of a recap.
First, I'm glad I didn't know that before I preached on it. I would have felt incredible pressure to really deliver it the way you would have delivered it. But
Well, I heard it and it was, you did, so you're good.
So basically we talk about three things that Paul prays we would experience. Strengthening, the indwelling of Christ in us,
Yeah.
and that we would experience Christ's love. So those are the three main points that the three main things Paul prays we would experience. I want to say that if we had more time, that there's a whole lot of things you could pull out of that.
Right.
I've heard Daryl teach on it. Daryl, awesome. And he's pulled 4 prayers out.
Right.
And I just didn't have the time, to do
Right.
all of those. But for our sake, we just kind of zeroed in on those 3
You know
things.
what I liked is this idea that Paul starts, for this reason I kneel before the
Yes.
Father, and how you talked about, standard Jewish praying, it would be standing up.
Yeah.
And sometimes your hands would be involved. And so it's really striking that Paul was kneeling. And I wonder if you just, before we get into the 3 other prayers, just remind us about that point.
Yeah, I think would have been very significant for the original readers of that letter to know, he's not just praying in an ordinary way for us, much more. He's like laboring in prayer for us. Like really, it gives the tone of I read one commentary that said that it was almost the position of coming before a king, like a royalty, and yet he referred to him as father.
Right,
so you have
right.
this tension of it's my father, and yet you're holy, and so I come and I'm kneeling before you, and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful picture.
I mean, I do love that. I feel like you can pray in all kinds of postures.
yes.
We know that. I love prayer walking. But there is something powerful about kneeling and expressing with our body something that's true in our hearts.
Yeah.
This awe and this reverence and this surrender, right? You can't fight from your knees.
Right.
A physical opponent. But so there's this sense of vulnerability and surrender to that. And I do think in COVID, it really is a significant thing to be reminded of, that our bodies interact with our spirits.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why some of us are struggling on Sundays, there's a lot of reasons that are legitimate.
Yes.
But, it's hard to engage with a sermon or engage with musical worship, like lying on our couch in our sweatpants.
Yeah.
Like literally our body. And so there is something to it's almost like a church hack to say, I'm going to get up, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to engage because my body is saying something.
Yeah.
And so could you also just take us through maybe some highlights of other things Paul prays? I love you to talk about this idea of strength.
Yeah. So I use the analogy between strength being it's the actual word for it means a brace or a reinforcement, and how back in 2005 the levees that broke in New Orleans,
Right.
which if you Google it, you'll see the devastation that happened in the city. And of course we were so close to it. It was just in our world for so long. We heard all about it.
When you were living in Texas?
No, we were living in Alabama.
Alabama, right.
So
Texas could be really far from New Orleans, and I wouldn't know.
actually, when New Orleans was devastated, they sent a lot of people from New Orleans to Houston. They bused there and they relocated there. Anyways, so what were we talking about?
You're talking about the levees.
The levees. Just that difference that Paul was not praying that God would just hold things off from us, but that he would actually gird us in the middle of a storm, because
Right.
and I just that was the picture. Like, I had these pictures come into my mind as I read this. Like, what is the kind of strength that he's praying we would have? It's not just, and I think we're tempted to pray more often than not, Lord, just don't let me go through hard things.
Right.
As opposed to, even just culturally as a church, I mean, our worldview is going to be very different, and it's going to be harder and harder and harder. I think about my kids, like, what is going to hold them whenever everyone else tells them, oh, you're wrong, you're intolerant. Like, there's so many things that we're going to hear that we just have to know, okay, Lord, I need your strength to be able to stand in the midst of this. And
so it's like this idea of reinforcement and support. Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, we often pray that God would change our circumstances, which I think is fine to do, right? But Paul doesn't very often. He does sometimes, but these prayers in his letters aren't really about that. Because even if God does change our circumstances that we don't like, or lift us out of them, there's another set of bad circumstances on their way. Life is just a series of bad circumstances with moments of levity and joy. And so what we really need, actually, is this strength in our inner person to face whatever might come. And so I love that he prays for that. And we're running out of time, but could we hit on, I mean, it's up to you. You want to talk about the love bit, or do you want to talk about immeasurably more? It's your
well, I think that I would just encourage in small groups this week in particular, just this idea of what does immeasurably more look like in your lives. And I would even encourage, like, if people have experienced that, like, oh, I have an immeasurably more story where God did something totally wild, that they would share it in small groups, even just because I think it does something when I hear those stories from other people. It does kind of bolster my faith a little bit to know, oh, if God does that for one of his other kids, why not for me? And I think. Do
you end with a story? Can you remind us of that? You talk about you and Ryan and this challenge you heard, because not only would I love the small groups to tell those types of stories, but to even spur one another on to pray these big, audacious prayers to the God who does immeasurably more. So it was years ago, and our pastor, who some of you might know, Brent Cantillon, I hope I can just say it, and love Pastor Brent. And I don't remember the title of the message. Ryan and I were talking about this, and we disagreed on what the title was, but I remember the prompt being basically something along the lines of, are you praying too small? Like, are you praying big enough? And so we went home, and the encouragement was to list 3 things. And so we went home, made a list of 3 like big things that we were just really going to need God to work in. And all 3 of those things, it was just like crazy. One of them was we had 3 boys. I really wanted a daughter. Ryan was done having kids. And so we were just actually praying that God would just reconcile our hearts on that. And we have a daughter. So there's that. And clearly you're the favored one in the marriage.
No, I mean, actually, it was just God did a 180 in Ryan's heart. And that's a whole other story that I could tell there. But anyway, and then also just a house, like we were praying for our finances, and rent was so much more expensive than a mortgage payment. It's just, weird. And I mean, within weeks, I had a voicemail on my phone of somebody that called and said, we would like to put a down payment on a house for you guys. I mean, bought us a house. It was just like, I would not have even known to pray for that. We were just praying for our finances and that God would give us a house somehow, someday, in his own timing. I mean, weeks later, like, what? So cool. It was really cool. And then one other thing, but.
Well, I mean, I'd love our groups to talk about that, how to pray and encourage one another to lean into big, audacious prayers. And so we'll throw to conversation leaders right now.
Yep. Bye.
How long is that?